Welcome to Banyen Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyen.com. Since 1970, Banyen Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyen.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Banyen Books podcast. My name is Ross McKeechee, and today we are joined by a wonderful guest, Mr. Norman Fischer. Norman Fischer has a long relationship with Banyen Books. He is a Zen Buddhist teacher and priest, a poet, author, and translator. His writings, teachings, and commitment to interfaith dialogue have supported and inspired Buddhist, Jewish, and other spiritual practitioners for decades. He is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and has a master's from the Graduate Theological Union at the University of California at Berkeley. As a Soto Zen teacher and priest, he practices in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki and is a Dharma heir of Sojun Mel Weitzman, from whom he received his Dharma transmission in 1988. He served as abbot for the San Francisco Zen Center from 1995 to 2000, and he then founded the Everyday Zen Foundation in 2000, a group and related projects in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. As a poet, Norman Fischer's first published works were released in 1979, and his first collection, titled Like a Walk Through a Park, was released in 1980. He has since published over 15 volumes of poetry, including 2 new releases. The first one is called Nature, and it was released by Tumba Press in March 2021. And then the second one was titled There Was a Clattering As, and that was released through Lavender Ink Press in April 2021. As an author, Norman has written 9 books on Zen and numerous essays and books on writing, poetry, and spirituality. His essays have been published in magazines such as Buddha Dharma, Tricycle, and Shambhala Sun, and in collections such as Radical Poetics and Secular Jewish Culture and The Best Buddhist Writing. Norman Fischer's numerous books include The World Could Be Otherwise, Imagination and the Bodhisattva Path, as well as Training in Compassion, Zen Teachings on the Practice of Lojong. He is here today in conversation about his newest book, released in May 2021. The book is titled When You Greet Me, I Bow: Notes and Reflections from a Life in Zen. The book is edited by Cynthia Schrager and is a collection of essays spanning Fischer's entire career. This book is highly engaging and each essay pertinent to the world right now. It allows us to see the fascinating development of the mind and the interests of a gifted writer and profoundly committed practitioner. So Banyen Books community, please join me in welcoming our special guest today, Norman Fischer. Norman, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Ross, for that introduction. You really got a lot of information in there. So I'm a little surprised to hear all that.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to know about you, and that was only scratching the surface. So I tried to get a little bit in there.
Thanks.
Yeah. Now, you've been practicing teaching writing for a long time now. How many decades? 5 decades or more?
Well, I started Zen practice in 1970, and I guess I started helping people to practice, as a more senior person, probably by around 1980 or so, or the early 80s. And then, as you said, I was given full permission to teach in 1988. So since then, I've been very active, guiding people the best I can. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, this book is really covers the span of your whole career as a writer, and I'm just curious to know off the top, what was the experience like for you going through all of this material from the past to the present, of course, with the help of your editor, Cynthia Schrager?
Well, yeah, it was Cynthia who did all the hard work of figuring out where all these things were, and when they had been published and so on. And she really did a lot of work. I'm quite grateful to her for it. She's a very skilled reader and an understander of texts. She's got a doctorate in English literature, so she really knows writing. She's the one who found the texts and put them together into thematic categories. And in fact, some of the texts needed to be edited because they weren't presentable for the present. They were published many years ago, maybe, and so I needed to gussy them up a little bit, and she helped a lot with that. She also had the idea to precede each of the thematic sections with new writing, so that I could do exactly what you're asking me to do, reflect, in the present about what I think about what I said in the past. And so I did that in front of each section of the book. She said, I was very lazy. And I said, oh no, I don't want to write new stuff. And she said, oh no, this will be really easy. It'll just be notes. You just have to write like very informal notes about the writing. You don't have to write anything too polished or finished. So I said, oh, that's good. I can probably do that quickly. So that's why the subtitle is Notes and Reflections from a Life in Zen, because part of it is contemporary notes written just about maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago. And then part of it is the essays that are collected. But
Right.
it was kind of fun, especially, I mean, I don't think I could have done it. If I did to do it on my own, it would have been impossible. But with Cynthia's help, it was kind of fun.
Wonderful. And I'll just show for those that have the video that they're watching, you can see the cover. When you greet me, I bow, notes and reflections from a life in Zen. And it's a wonderful book, really wonderful book. For myself, not being a student of Zen, I found it very helpful and illuminating. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, for everybody here, we're going to do a little practice. Norman is going to guide us through a short centering practice before we get into the rest of the conversation.
Thank you. And I'll use my meditation bell, and I don't know how it'll work with the sound and the technology, but I'm going to ring it 3 times to open up a few minutes of practice. And when you hear the sound of the bell, assuming you can hear it well, let that sound bring you back to your body as you're sitting. So gather in your awareness to your body. Imagine as if the awareness is scattered here and there, you don't even know where. And now you gather it in and you bring it to your feet and your lower leg and upper leg and your spine Square your shoulders and open your chest. Feel a gentle lifting in your spine. And feel your arms, your upper arms and lower arms and your hands. Maybe you can feel the blood moving through your body in your hands. And feel your breathing. If you can, feel it in your belly. Very grounded, deep breath connected to the earth and the sky. And just breathe gently in and out. And feel it in your belly. And let yourself relax and release, especially on the exhale. Feel the beauty of that exhale. And what a pleasure. And what a surprise to be alive for one more breath. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now I'm curious, the book, When You Greet Me, I Bow, it's broken up into 4 sections and you give your notes from the present for each section. How did you decide on the theme for each section?
Well, as I say, that was mostly Cynthia's work. And you know, she's a good reader, so she imagined, you know, getting, first of all, I think that the material, I think she said that the material in the book is about half of what I've published over the last decades. So first she had to select what was worth reprinting. And then as she read and thought about the material, she saw these 4 themes. So it was really her ability as a reader to kind of see through the forest of words for the theme. So it was really her doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first section, it's titled Abuda and Abuda, and you speak about your notes at the start as the joy and catastrophe of relationship. Now, I'm really curious, you talk about how you've come to feel now that Zen practice is really about relationship. That's the heart of Zen practice. So what did you start out believing Zen practice was as an early practitioner, and what has brought you to this point now?
Well, I think I started out concerned for my own suffering and my own spiritual transformation. So I think I had a kind of heroic, view of Buddhism in some way. But when you think about the story of the Buddha, it is a kind of heroic story. I mean, the Buddha goes off on his own. He abandons everything, right? And he goes off on his own, not knowing how or where or why. And although he does study with some teachers and join their communities, it seems for a brief period of time. And then he goes on his solitary quest for awakening. So that story was kind of how I looked at it in the beginning. But as I went on, step by step by step, and I really began to appreciate more deeply and understand the teachings, I saw that the whole point of the teaching is that there is no heroic individual, or historic for that matter, individual who is like, by his great strength and determination, overcoming all odds and getting awakened. There's no such thing. And in fact, the fact that we hold on to such an image is why we're suffering. Because when you understand the Buddha's teaching of impermanence and non-self, that's what it amounts to, that everything comes and goes in a moment's time. Nothing at all remains even long enough for it to be named. And everything that happens is a moment of meeting, moment after moment. Phenomena arise and meet and join and pass away. And what we call me and you is a series of such meetings. And we're always meeting something. By relationship, I don't mean just relationship with people, although that's very important and primary in human life and in our practice, but it's relationship with everything, with our breath, which is, after all, air coming in. We're literally breathing in the sky, right, and exhaling the sky and the air around us. And so every moment there's a sound, there's a sensation, there's something we're meeting. And in that moment, it creates our life. And then that same moment, it passes away. So every moment is a moment of relationship, a moment of meeting. And that is awakening, to appreciate those meetings one after the other. It's not some state of mind that I'm achieving through my intensive meditation practice. So that's how it's changed for me over these many years.
Okay. So kind of dropping this idea that there's somewhere we're trying to get, and dropping into that relationship to whatever's arising in the present.
Exactly. Yeah, the
Okay.
present moment is a moment of relationship in which all these things arise together. Right, exactly. Nowhere to get to, just but that moment.
One of your essays in the first section is titled "No Teachers of Zen."
Mm-hmm.
What's the real essence of the role of teacher in your tradition?
Well, I can only say how I understand it, because I don't know that I necessarily speak officially, for the tradition. Probably other Soto Zen teachers would have something different to say. But in my opinion, what would you teach? Zen, if Zen is really helping us to just live our lives without getting in our own way in this strange and beautiful moment of existing for 1 second and then not existing and then existing again, if it's just that, then what are you going to teach? How do you teach that? It's like saying, how do you teach someone to be alive? You don't really need to teach anybody how to be alive. They already are alive. So I don't think there's any such thing as teaching Zen, in my opinion. However, as we all know, if that's true, it doesn't matter, because we're suffering anyway. And we are stuck with ourselves and all of our confusion. And we do need to transform. So there is a process of transformation. And the practice, I really think, is astonishingly effective in bringing about transformation for people, astonishingly effective. And it has a format. There's a whole, in Soto Zen, it's formal, there's Zazen, and there's chanting, and there's bowing, and there's traditional meetings with the teacher, which are ritualized, and there's Dharma talks, which are ritualized. So, in other words, there's a whole mandala that you enter in order to become transformed. And in that mandala, there's a place in the mandala for a Zen teacher. We call Zen teacher, even though there's nothing to teach and nobody teaching. There's a place in that mandala, and someone has to stand in that place. And so in our tradition, you go through a whole set of rituals to empower you to stand in that place. And then all you have to do is stand in that place and do your own practice. And then the mandala will affect the transformation. So there's a role for a Zen teacher, I think, which is a very important role in the mandala. But it's not the Zen teacher who knows the thing that he or she teaches. Rather, it's the mandala itself that effects transformation with nothing to teach and nothing to learn.
What's for you been the biggest challenge of standing in that position or that role, as you've said?
Well, I think the biggest challenge for me personally has been knowing that you are going to hurt people when you're in that position. Because no matter what you do, even if you're, a wonderful person who never says a crossword or understands everyone perfectly, if such a thing were even possible, but even if it were, people would always bring their own pain to that mandala, and hopefully the mandala absorbs the pain and transforms it, but sometimes it doesn't because the pain is too deep, and so the person ends up becoming hurt, misunderstanding, becoming hurt, and can easily feel that you're the person who has hurt them. And maybe sometimes you make mistakes and you do hurt them, but I think that even when you don't make mistakes and hurt them, you can hurt them anyway. And I know that, and I appreciate that very deeply. I really understand that point. And so I know it's inevitable. And even though the mandala mostly helps people far more than it hurts people, so more people are helped, but I'm not impressed, that people say they're helped, and especially if they think that I helped them. That doesn't impress me because I don't think it's true that I've helped them. But I do take it gravely, and I feel responsible when people are hurt. So, I mean, even though it's not necessarily reasonable, why don't I take credit for when they're, when they're helped? And if I'm going to take responsibility for when they're hurt, no, I don't take credit for when they're helped, but I do take responsibility, and I feel great sorrow when they're hurt. And I've experienced it. I've been through this with people. So, and I never forget about it. So that's the hardest part. But, it's not even that, to be honest, it's not that hard because it's, everybody suffers, right? I mean, if that's my suffering, right, that I hurt people in that way without intending it, I can live with that. It's okay. It doesn't make me obsessed or with it. So it's not so bad. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. It's not so bad.
That's good. That's good. The second part of the book, Form is Emptiness, and your notes on thinking, writing, and emptiness. So one of the things that is interesting to me is that we can come to emptiness through the body. So I'm curious what role, and I noticed in the meditation you instructed us to allow the bell to bring us back to our body each time. What role does the body play in Zen practice?
Oh, it's hugely important. Mostly the practice is a physical practice. So when we're sitting in Zazen, we're not really focusing on spiritual states or reviewing in our mind teachings. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are many visualizations and things to work with the imagination. So that's a practice that exists in Buddhism a lot. But in Zen, we don't really do that. Our practice is very concrete and physical. What I was giving instructions about a minute ago is pretty much it. You just return to your body and you pay attention to your body and you pay attention to your breathing. And yes, things might arise in your mind that you're aware of, but you don't pay so much attention to them. You let them go and return to the body. And then when you get up from the cushion, then there's bowing and chanting, which are physical activities. And then going forth into your day, there's, walking between your place of work and the bathroom, or walking this way and that way. And there's breathing all day long and paying attention to your senses. If I'm talking to a person, I'm seeing them, I'm hearing their voice, I'm sensing their presence. That's all in my body. So really the practice is mostly in the body. Of course, we all are thinking, because human beings seem to do that most of the time. Thinking is going on. And then we're thinking in language, we're thinking in words. And words are, I appreciate this a lot as a poet, words are amazingly inexact and crude ways to describe or name things, even though we don't know that about them, but they really are. And so with our thoughts, we're creating situations that cause us a lot of suffering. And so to a great extent, very simply, to balance thinking with awareness of our body and our breathing so that the thinking doesn't run away with us, that's a huge deal. I mean, maybe life is as simple as that. Just be aware that you're alive all together in your body and your breathing and your senses, not just in your thinking and in your emotions, but put it all together into a life, and then you can live. So yeah, the body is everything in Zen practice.
How is it that the experience of emptiness, or the awareness of emptiness, you point to this in one of your essays, how emptiness, when we come to that place, when we know that as truth, it frees us of what you call the afflictive emotions. How is it that happens?
Well, emptiness officially means that everything is without the substance we project onto it. So there's something going on here, but not what we think. We think that there are solid entities who own things like their own bodies and their own selves, and that the issues that we're concerned about are fundamentally concrete. But they're not. Everything is just sort of a very light and airy phantom coming and going. So it's real, but it's real in a much more delightful and connected way than we think. It's the lack of connection that makes us suffer. But in fact, everything is connected. So when we realize that things are not the way we thought they were, but they're very light and airy, the basis on which our afflictive emotions depend dissolves. So if I'm mad at you and I think you really said something really insulting to me, and now I really don't like you, and you wounded me, now I'm a miserable person because of that. But if I realize that, well, these were just very fleeting events happening in the room between us, and that the thoughts that I have of anger or hurt are insubstantial, just coming and going. I don't need to really believe them. I just need to observe them and see how they make me feel and let them go, then I'm not activated in the same way at all. And I can still be a human being. I could still be hurt if you don't like me, but that hurt doesn't really have to plague me or make me that upset, because, okay, I could be hurt. That's all right. It comes, it goes. It's not anything substantial. So everything is okay in that way. And the emptiness teachings and our ability to actualize them in our own bodies and hearts and minds makes that kind of shift in us.
The third part of the book is titled East West, and you give your notes on cultural encounter. The essays examine ways that cultures and also religions influence one another. So I know that you've done a lot of work in terms of interfaith dialogue and bringing together particularly the Jewish tradition and the Buddhist tradition. How is that shifted over time in terms of where did you start out with in your work with interfaith dialogue, and particularly the bringing together of Buddhism and Jewish practice, and how is that transformed and become what it is now?
Well, I've also done a lot with the Catholic, lots of intermonastic dialogue with Catholic religious. That's been very illuminating and valuable to me. But I think that how it started was really unintentionally. Almost everything that I have done has been unintentional. I stumbled into everything, so I can't really take any credit for any of it, because I was just kind of crashing along and then things happened. And it's kind of wonderful. I'm happy about all the things that happened, but I didn't make them happen. So it's like that in this case. I had a really close friend who we went to University of Iowa Writers Workshop together, and then we moved to California together. And after we were done with that in 1970, and we were practicing Zen together too for about a decade. And to make a long story short, he ended up becoming a rabbi. And we stayed in touch the whole time that he was studying to be a rabbi. And I grew up in the Jewish tradition, and I always appreciated it. And when I was a boy, I had a wonderful rabbi who took me under his wing. So that gave me a positive feeling for it. But I didn't have much to do with it, when I was studying Zen. But when my friend became a rabbi, he said, well, let's start doing things together. And he was a meditator after practicing Zen for a while. So we started doing Jewish meditation eventually. And that made me study Judaism more. And then over the years of doing that, I have lots of rabbis now that are friends and colleagues, and I do lots of retreats with them. And I become, very much aware of the Jewish meditation world, which is a Jewish world. It's a branch or a tendency within Judaism. And then I think years ago, I was invited to attend some Buddhist Christian dialogues, and accepted the invitations, and again, had a lot of friends that I made through those conferences and events, and practiced in their monasteries and visited their monasteries. And so I really appreciate, in this, it's really not exactly right to think of it as interreligious dialogue, as if we're comparing notes. This is what we say, that's what you say, that kind of thing. It's more like we're doing each other's practices. And in doing each other's practices, we're getting on the inside of each other's traditions. And when you do that, you'll inevitably learn something about the main tradition you're practicing, because you see it differently from another side. And I think it really deepens your appreciation of it, and also your appreciation of the other tradition. So there's many ways. Human beings are so various, and there are many ways of expressing a human life. And I think all the different religions are very honed down expressions of particular cultures' ways of being human. And it's a very beautiful thing to understand from the inside and from the heart any religious tradition. I think it's just really poignant. I really enjoy it. I find it quite moving always.
The other thing that I really found fascinating was you talked about the connection between cultures and how Japanese Zen coming to America, it didn't just impact American culture, but in fact, Japanese Zen would have been impacted by its contact with American culture. Can you comment on that for us as well?
Yeah, well, just the other day I was talking to people in an event, something like this, and somebody asked about that, and they were asking about political activism and political awareness in Zen. And they said, isn't it going against the Zen tradition? Didn't Zen in Japan always uphold traditional values rather than being socially and politically aware? Wasn't that what Zen was always in Japan? And so if you're a Western Zen person and you're emphasizing, as I have often emphasized, political and social awareness and action, isn't that anti-Zen or untraditional or somehow maybe a misapprehension of Zen? And so I said, well, that's interesting because in a way it's true. I think that the Western Zen emphasis on political and social awareness comes from our Western traditions. The Bible, in the Hebrew Bible and the Gospels are very much political. They're about the world and the need for there to be justice and inclusion in the world. Jesus is always talking about the poor and taking care of people and sacrificing the law so that people would be better served and so on. And the prophets of the Bible are always railing on about justice and about the need to be fair to people and so on. So when Western Buddhists have a sense of social awareness, it's because they're Westerners and they all grew up with this sense of social responsibility. But then the Japanese, who are very aware of the Western Buddhist movement, and there's plenty of connection over the last 50 years between Japanese and American Zen, younger Japanese Buddhists are now themselves socially aware. And Japanese Buddhists now engage in all kinds of social welfare projects. And I think to some extent, it's a reflection of their observing us and thinking of the West as being maybe a more updated or contemporary form of Zen. And so then they, especially the younger priests now, take that in and emulate it in some way. So what I'm saying here is probably debatable. In other words, somebody could surely point to many counterexamples, but I think, nevertheless, I think there's truth to it.
Dogen's, correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrongly. Is it Dogen's Shobogenzo?
Dogen, yeah, Dogen.
Dogen's Shobogenzo.
Yeah.
What makes this work so unique and powerful? Obviously, reading When You Greet Me, I Bow, it's had a huge impact on your life and work. What makes it such a unique and powerful work?
Well, I'm pretty sure that Dogen did not consider himself to be an innovator in any way. Innovation is not a value in Buddhism. You don't get any points for being unique in your approach. What you want to do is be true to the tradition and present it within your culture in the truest way you can. So that's what he was doing. But nevertheless, just like he can't help, like I can't help being an English-speaking American, and you can't help being an English-speaking Canadian, he couldn't help being a Japanese-speaking Japanese. So he couldn't help but make the Buddhist tradition merge with the cultural values that he had and spiritual values that he had as a Japanese person. And to make something very complicated, perhaps too simple, in a word, what I think is so wonderful about Dogen, I'll make a couple points. One point, maybe spiritually the most important point, is that Dogen's approach to Buddhism validates and cherishes this ordinary human life of suffering, and sees this ordinary human life of suffering held properly as the highest expression of spiritual truth and the highest expression of Buddha Dharma. And you wouldn't necessarily get that idea from other forms of Buddhism. And to me, that is what I really love about Dogen. He always has that as his basic understanding. But the other thing that I think is noteworthy about Dogen and unusual about him and makes him so appealing to the contemporary audience, not necessarily a general audience, but certainly a philosophical and a religious audience, is that Dogen understands in a very sophisticated way how language is both our prison house and the key to that same prison house. So it's language that imprisons us and language that liberates us. And Dogen understands that in a very profound way. He knows that we're communicating with language, and we're thinking most of the time in language. And so we can't avoid language. We need to understand language and hold it in a different way. And he is one of the few who writes about that. And even when he's not writing about it, he's demonstrating it in his writing. So his writing has this sort of sometimes dazzling, paradoxical complexity that causes people to scratch their heads a lot of the time, like, what is he talking about? But what he's doing is demonstrating in his own writing this point. And so I would say, if I had to pick out two things about Dogen that make him, unique and important, I would pick out those two things. And certainly, personally, those are the two things that have been so valuable for me, and why Dogen has been a source for me. When I got my degree in Buddhist studies, in religion, with a concentration in Buddhist studies, I did my thesis on Dogen. And I completed the degree, I think, in 1975. So I've been reading Dogen intensively since 1975.
And you were involved in the latest translation by Tanahashi and Levitt, is that right?
To some extent. I had worked with Kaz years before. I haven't worked with Kaz on Dogen translations for some decades, but some of the work that I did with him in the past is included in the present volume that he did with Peter. Yeah.
Okay. Now the fourth part of the book, the final section of the book, is titled Difference in Dharma, and you give your notes on social engagement. So I'm curious, one of the big issues of our time, and you point to it, are issues around identity, whether it's gender identity or racial or ethnic identity, and equality. And I'm wondering how you see those issues now through the lens of Zen Buddhism.
Well, Zen has actually a very developed and sophisticated teaching about this. I recently, in my Dharma seminar, we did, I think, a 2-month study of a 1-page poem that's chanted typically in Zen centers. And the English translation of the title would be something like "The Merging of Difference and Unity." And so this is a fundamental teaching of Zen, that each thing is at the same time absolutely unique, and its difference from all other things must be awesomely appreciated. And at the same time, each and everything is nothing other than everything else. It's totally the same and non-different from everything else. And the dialectic between sameness and difference is really at the core of our spiritual practice. It's not just a social dimension, it's also a spiritual dimension. So when I am aware all around me of everyone struggling to find their sense of identity, which means their sense of difference, to articulate, this is the way I'm different from others. I think that's so important for everyone to do personally, especially if they feel pain and confusion around that sense of identity, or they feel that it's an identity that has not been appreciated in the world, so it needs to be emphasized and appreciated and understood. That's really important work. But the other side of that work is that we're not in warring camps. We're actually not apart from one another as human beings and as living creatures. We are part of a living world, and everyone that we meet is our brother and our sister, whether it's a person in our identity group or not in our identity group, or even a non-person. Maybe it's an animal, or maybe it's a tree. Those beings are also part of our heart. So I think we need both sides. The trouble is when you say that, the side of unity, then you could be avoiding the difference or covering up the difference. And so we really need both sides. And I see that. And sometimes, one side gets overbalanced of necessity because it's been underbalanced. So it needs to be overbalanced. So I think that's how I understand what's going on now in the world with all the identity politics and the need for identity. It doesn't seem wrong at all to me. It seems necessary. But I think that we also can't forget the other side. And most people who come to wisdom about this see both sides.
Thank you. Now, before we get to the audience questions, I have one more of my own questions for you, which is on the practice of the precepts in Zen Buddhism. I'm just curious if you can give the community here a little bit of an overview of what that looks like, the practice of the precepts.
Well, we have a ritual in which a person who's initiated in the practice and really is committed to it can take 16 bodhisattva precepts. And they're just what you would expect, don't kill anybody or anything if you can help it. Don't steal, don't lie and stuff like that. But the way they're understood is the precepts are understood as a description of the way that the Buddha would live. The Buddha who understands with loving kindness each and every person and would never wish to harm anybody. How would that Buddha look? He would look like a person who doesn't lie. He would look like a person who doesn't kill. He would look like a person who is very modest and humble, and a person who speaks kindly to others, and so on and so forth. So in that way, we understand the precepts as a kind of direction that we're heading in, rather than as a series of rules to be obeyed. So we try to live by the precepts, but a lot of times we make mistakes and fail, and then we try to confess and repent and do better. So we're all aware that no one keeps the precepts perfectly. And at the same time, we understand in the eye of emptiness that you can't ever break any precepts. Precepts cannot be broken, just as they cannot ever be kept perfectly. They cannot ever be broken. So there's no way you condemn somebody, for breaking precepts, because actually they can't be broken. So if somebody does very drastic misconduct that causes harm, the person needs correction for their own benefit, and maybe sometimes need to be removed from other people for the well-being of those other people. But the person is never not a Buddha, and never not to be forgiven and understood, even when punishment of some sort is indicated. So the precepts kind of bring you to that sort of view, and you apply that to yourself as well. I sometimes need to be corrected and restricted because of something I've done, but I never need to condemn myself as a human being. I'm still a Buddha, and I still need to forgive myself for my own conduct.
Thank you. The first question we have from the community here is from Dennis. It's either Dennis or Denise. How has your understanding of taking the bodhisattva vows changed and shaped your practice?
Well, I would say mostly in the beginning, I suppose I thought that the bodhisattva vows were something unusual and something that were external to me. And as I've practiced over the years, I realized that the bodhisattva vows are not external. And they're not something that I'm doing or moving along a path, as much as they are expressions of my heart, of all human beings. Have the bodhisattva vow as the essential aspect. We were talking a moment ago about identity. Well, you could say that our fundamental identity, actually, apart from all the other identities that we all have lots of identities, right? Our fundamental identity is the bodhisattva vow, to live for and with others, and to make that connection to others the centerpiece of what it means for us to be alive. I think we're built for that, and we have that in our hearts, and eventually we come to see it and appreciate it. And that's been my evolution in the bodhisattva vow, I think.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question we have is from Hoda. And Hoda says, can you please speak of Dogen's genjoko as a practice in daily life?
Well, Genjo Koan is the title of what's probably Dogen's most famous and most read, especially in the West, essay, part of his book, Shobogenzo, that you mentioned earlier. And what Genjo Koan is teaching is that every moment arises as a koan. Every moment that we take for granted and just sort of put it together with a whole bunch of other moments and call it a day, is a mysterious arising of the truth. Every moment, if we're really present, we see the mystery and the majesty of impermanence, because things arise and pass away at the same time. So we're all the time living and dying. And what we call death is not something that we haven't been experiencing every single moment of our lives. And that doesn't make any sense. And that is impossible to understand. And yet we're living that moment after moment after moment. And so Genjo Koan is telling us that the Dharma is simply plunging into that moment as it is, and giving our whole life to that moment, and having our life be an expression of understanding the truth of that moment. That's what he's saying in Genjo Koan. So that's my little mini Dharma talk about Genjo Koan. I think that's what Hoda was asking me to do, I think.
I think you're right. Thank you. Paula asks, do you equate awakening with maturity? And can you speak to what you understand as maturity? Some of this you speak to in your book, Taking Our Places.
Right. Yeah, that's the theme of that book. And I really believe that, I really think that there's nothing special about Dharma, and there's nothing special about the Buddha. I think the Buddha who was like a troubled person after all. You don't leave home and, you know, give away all your possessions and wander around in the wilderness if you're a well-adjusted, happy young fellow. No, the Buddha was a troubled guy. And then he became, in my opinion, a normal person, a normal human being. To me, that's what awakening is, just becoming a normal, mature human being. I don't think awakening amounts to anything other than that. The thing is that you look around and you realize how rare that is. Most people are not grown up and they're not normal. I mean, we have this whole idea of like, you know, mental illness, and we even have an idea like success. Some people are successful, other people are mentally ill, but actually we're all mentally ill, and there are no successful people at all. Only people who are just normal, mature human beings. And they're rare. I mean, fortunately, they exist. And sometimes we don't even notice them because they're not successful maybe, and they don't have the marks that we have come to value in human beings. But if you have your eyes open, you can see them and you really appreciate them. So I think that's right. I think spiritual practice is just the effort to become a mature, ordinary, and normal human being. And that in itself is an enormous blessing, and unfortunately, all too rare.
Ardell asks us, can you please share an example of what you found illuminating from your interactions with Catholicism?
Well, I think Catholicism is such a beautiful tradition. I think that we live in a Christian world, so we take this totally for granted. But when you think about it, what an idea, right? God, by definition, the all-powerful boss of everything, right? To be propitiated and worshiped. God gets born as a human being. Okay, God gets born as a human being. For sure, he's the king of everything. He conquers everything. He's like the best human being ever, right? No, God gets born as a human being who is pathetically tortured and killed. God does that. What an idea. Unbelievable. That means that there's something precious, number one, about human suffering, and number two, about unfortunate people. So instead of the obvious, if you want to be great and powerful, and people who are not great and powerful, well, why bother with them? It's the opposite. The person that you don't want to bother with, who's pathetic and not powerful, is the most precious, because God is that person. Whoa, who would have thought of such a thing? It's really quite unbelievable. I remember once I was in Oaxaca in Mexico, where there's a lot of native peoples. I remember going to the cathedral in town, and peasants, people who work on farms were coming from all over, lining up. There was like blocks and blocks of lined up people to go to confession in the church. And I realized, wow, these people who've been so downtrodden and oppressed for so long, no wonder they love this religion. No wonder they understand this religion, because God was just like them. This is an amazing thing, I think. I can't get over it even now, So I think it's just a beautiful, and you take it for granted in our culture, and then we're so aware of all the, bad ideas and bad things that have happened as a result of Christian power in the world. But in essence, that's what the religion is teaching us, and it's a very beautiful thing.
Thank you. So the next question, I think we've got time just for one more question. And it's about spiritual bypassing from Anne. She just wonders, what have you experienced or seen in terms of spiritual bypassing?
Well, I guess everybody understands that term now. It's been used a lot. It was created by psychologists who were practicing Buddhism and noticed that a lot of people who had a lot of pain were hoping that they could meditate their way out of that pain without having to confront it, by kind of getting in a bliss state and getting enlightened, and then the pain would dissolve. And they call that spiritual bypassing, which is possible. Actually, it's never been possible for me. I've always been so aware of my suffering and so unable to avoid it in any way that spiritual bypassing was never anything. And I'm not a great, spiritual meditator or something like that. So I mostly I've had to struggle in meditation rather than have transcendent states. If I have transcendent moments, they're not nearly as many as the moments of suffering and struggle in meditation. So spiritual bypass, as far as I'm aware myself, has not been something that I've been involved in. But I have seen people who have tremendous suffering that can be quite buried. And those people are often, or some, not often, but sometimes given to spiritual obsession, obsession with ecstatic states and high states of various sorts. I mean, the mind is capable of, tremendous fireworks, of course, all sorts of visions and feelings kinetically, and sensations that are, quite transcendent and lovely. And I think, well, I don't want to get on a tangent, so let me retract my brain. Yeah, so people with a lot of suffering would naturally want to not deal with that and engage in spectacular meditation states, or want to meditate all the time. In our practice, it seems harder to do because we're just focusing on the body and the breath. And there's even lore in our tradition that if you have something really important happening in your meditation, don't pay too much attention to it. Just come back to your body and your breath. So in our tradition, people don't have transcendent states too much. And they're encouraged to look at what's there. And eventually, if you sit there long enough, whatever your pain is will manifest, and then you'll have to deal with it. So yes, if I see someone who looks like they're doing spiritual bypassing, I will kind of gently try to bring them down to earth. And sometimes it doesn't work out, and then they'll get mad and walk away. And sometimes it does, and little by little, gently, without forcing anything, you can digest your pain and make your peace with it. Even if its effects don't ever go away, you can live with them a lot better through the practice.
That's all for our audience questions. Before we say goodbye, I just want to find out what's next for you in your work and practice.
Well, like everybody else that I know in the Buddhist world, I'm on Zoom. I'm with you on Zoom today, right? So everything's on Zoom, which makes life actually a little easier, because although I can do more things and go more places, and I'm not trying to do things, I do plenty of things, but if somebody asks me, I usually try to say yes if I can. It's easier because I don't have to get in cars and airplanes. And that's the hard part, right? Packing your suitcase and try to remember what you're supposed to bring with you, and getting to the airport or the venue on time. Much more difficult than just I set a little alarm and I come down to my office at a certain time. So I'm going to keep doing that and more of that. Starting tomorrow, I have a 7-day session at our community, our Red Cedar Zen community in Bellingham, Washington, not far from where Banyen is. So I'll be in a week session then, and then I'll just look and see what the next thing on my calendar is, and I'll just do each thing. And I'll keep doing that until I can't do it anymore, I guess. And I'm always writing. So today I wrote some poems, and I'm always writing poems and other things, writing in my journal. I have many, many hundreds of volumes of journals that I always write in. So I try to stay out of trouble and keep staying alive and taking care of myself. And that's what I'll keep doing, more or less the same.
Wonderful. And if people want to learn more about you and your work, where can they go online?
Well, the website of our local community is everydayzen.org, O-R-G, and I think everything. I'm sorry to say that the information on that website it's hard to keep it up, so it's not 100% always up to date. But the main thing on the website is many thousands of Dharma talks that are easily streamed, and there's no charge or fee or anything like that. You can make a donation if you want, but you can listen to Dharma talks all you like. And there's also a study guide on there where you can study in a somewhat systematic fashion Buddhist teachings and texts with my audio or written commentaries to those texts. So that's the main website, www.everydayzen.org. And I also have an author's page, normanfischer.org, which shows links to all my books. So that's where they can find out more if they're interested.
That's great. Thank you. And a reminder, everyone, you can purchase any of Norman's books through the Banyen website, banyen.com. A big thank you to the whole Banyen Books community for all of your support over the years. And now big thanks to everybody who works in the shop at Banyen Books, from purchasing, shipping, receiving, to everybody out front. And of course, to our producer of all the events and this podcast, Jacob Steele, for all of the great work that he does. And of course, Norman Fischer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Ross, and the whole team, and Jacob, and everybody who works in the store. Banyen is a great institution in Vancouver. It's really something. So, and congratulations on your anniversary.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyen Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele. The show is edited by Abdo Habani. And I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyen Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyen.com.